Good evening, and welcome to the 2022 Last Lecture event. I'm Kurt Kemper, Professor of History and the Director of the General Beadle Honors Program here at Dakota State University. Tonight's event is hosted by the General Beadle Honors Program in conjunction with support from the Office of President Jose Marie Griffiths. The last lecture is balloted in the spring semester, with the honor students selecting from all faculty who are retiring in that term. Some years we don't have any eligible faculty retirements. Some years the students have voted not to honor a lecturer. But either way, the decision is that of the students. The lecture is meant to serve as a valedictory for the honored lecturer, but it also marks the culminating event of the academic year for the General Beadle Honors Program. As such, I'd like to take a brief moment of Jack's spotlight to identify our seniors this year, some of whom will be graduating with the designation of Beadle Scholar by dint of completion of their senior thesis, while others have remained in the program through their time here at DSU to complete the other requirements. Rebecca Amison, Keenan Bousquet, Dylan Egan, Michael Fonlander, Robert Gosicki, Sophia Lewis, Jillian Morris, Xander Morrison, Pusida Sheehan, Nicholas Smith, and Jack Weekly will all be graduating this year. I also wanted to acknowledge our previous last lecturers. Ethelle Bean, 2017. Sue Conover, 2020. Is Sue here? Sue is not. And unfortunately, something I thought we'd have to wait an awful long time to have to acknowledge, we also lost Wayne Pauli this year, who just gave last year's lecture. The last lecture is an event that can be found on many campuses, though a quick Google search shows not as many have succeeded in maintaining their series as we have. The concept originated back in 2007 when Carnegie Mellon University's well-respected computer science professor Randy Pausch announced that he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. His students and colleagues urged him to give a valedictory address before his health robbed him of the opportunity, and what is now has 21 million views on YouTube, Professor Pausch delivered his famous last lecture, Achieving Your Childhood Dreams, to a standing room only lecture hall a few months before his death. The premise of the last lecture is quite simple. What would you say if you had just one last lecture to give? One last chance to reach us? Would you make us laugh? Would you make us cry? Would you inspire us, incite us, or provoke us? What would you do with one last platform? The last lecturer at DSU is selected by a vote of the students in the honors program, and all faculty, career instructors, and coaches are eligible, but only in the year they retire. As a result, it really is often a last lecture, but also one by design in which the lecturer is without constraint. They are free to humor, to offend, to infuriate, to issue a call to arms or a mea culpa, to warn us of dangers not yet realized or repent for sins regretted. Tonight's lecture is entitled A Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threat Analysis of the Human Race. Something I'm sure we'll easily cover in 60 minutes. Like most lecturers, Jack Walters' service to the university has often entailed tremendous long-term significance because of his ability to envision what is not yet real, but is nonetheless possible. Jack will be the first to tell you that nothing of substance gets accomplished without a team that pulls in the same direction. But having been on some of Jack's teams, I can assure you his leadership has often helped get us over the finish line. In what is now almost unfathomable, before Jack pushed Doug Knowlton to create DSU's own institutional review board, DSU faculty had to seek approval for their human subjects research by actually going through SDSU's IRB. But with Jack's leadership, and not always quiet prodding, President Knowlton approved our own IRB, which Jack chaired for much of his decade on that committee. And Jack was an early advocate on our campus for continuous quality improvement, or CQI. Now, I just got to DSU when we rolled this out, and I had the same thought that I discovered that other faculty had too when Jack mentioned this. My first thought was, wait a minute, we have to go through accreditation every year with this? And knowing faculty were less than thrilled about this transition, Jack often reminded us that institutions constantly refine and improve themselves or they start dying. I got to know Jack earlier in my tenure here at DSU. He and I both served on the old research committee, and we quickly found common ground in grousing about how much time we were wasting on arguing about whether we could get a research tab on the website.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It helps in being last lecturer if you are willing to speak truth to power. And it is a trait that those of us who work with Jack absolutely love and leaves uncomfortable those for whom Jack works. I will never forget Jack's comment at a research committee meeting when the then on-campus webmaster needed to be reminded that the, quote, M in master was not uppercase. And then there is the faculty-wide email that Jack sent to all of us on the eve of commencement in 2014. You think we forget about that, I bet. Asking us the uncomfortable question about whether, in our rush to assess, retain, graduate, and everything else we're supposed to do, if we were actually also insisting on making sure that our students were learning. Jack had a student in his senior level management course whose inability to write or think on her own did not reflect well on the university or the reputation we've been slowly building since the mission change. I don't know what answers came from Jack's email across campus, but in our building, I know it was discussed as a bold question to ask, and one that has sparked no small amount of soul searching among many of us. Jack's has always been one of the voices of conscience around here, and it is a voice that has made us better and will most definitely be missed. So, Professor Walters, won't you please teach us one more time? We are missing you.
That little piece of paper hid something that I didn't want Kurt to see. So, yeah, thanks for that trip down memory lane, Kurt. That was great. I really do have this thing packed into 40 minutes. Let's see if I can do it. First of all, thank you very much to President Griffiths and to the university for having this event. It's a wonderful experience for me, and I think these kinds of things, including when Ethelle did it and Wayne did it and others did it, those are good experiences for the university. The honors program and being on that committee has been one of my best experiences here, absolutely, with both colleagues and with the students. It's just been great, and I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you to the students for allowing me this opportunity and this honor, and thanks to all DSU students who are here this evening. Finally, warmest welcome to colleagues and friends. So, as I started thinking about this and General Beadle, I was very fortunate to find on the internet a very early daguerreotype of General Beadle. We think this was in the years maybe 1857, 58, 59, and it's amazing the quality of this image. This, we think, was around the time that the general dreamed up the honors program. So this is him here. And, you know, then he went on after that to the Civil War, and it was very hard on him. And so in the memories that have ensued since then, we tend to think of the general much more monochromatically than we did in this early daguerreotype there. When people ask me about my time here, it's a quick, easy answer. I say that I truly wish that I had come here in 1995 and not in 2005, because this experience here has been the most productive and the most enjoyable and the most satisfying of my entire career, not just in the academic side. And it's because of the people. This isn't a big shock, right? It's because of the people. So many smart, hardworking, kind people. And I've been lucky to have friendships across the school and friendships across the town, and they've meant an awful lot to me. My colleagues in the College of Business and Information Systems are some of the people I have trusted most in my whole career. As for the business department, it was doing great before I got here. It was a very high-functioning department. And then I came in 2005, and now, as I'm getting ready to leave, only 2 of the people who were here then are still here now. And one of the things that's a great compliment to the business department is that the performance, this high performance that was there when I came here, has been sustained. So people have retired, moved on, all those kinds of things, and new people have come, and that high performance has been sustained. Not only is that a great thing to say about an organization, it has been a priceless addition to the quality of my life. Absolutely. So we all know Dakota State is a technology-forward institution, and I have a technology-oriented story to tell you. And I apologize already for people who've heard this story before. I see some of you in the audience. There was this old guy who cut firewood for a living. And he got to thinking that his saw wasn't working so great anymore, so he went to the hardware and talked to the salesperson. They looked over all these fancy chainsaws and picked one out, and he bought it. Then a week went by, and he came back, and he was mad. And the salesperson said, well, what is the problem? He said, let me tell you something. I worked harder this week than I have ever worked in my life. And I was barely able to cut the amount of firewood that I routinely cut in a week. So the salesperson said, well, let's check it out. Took the saw, flipped a switch, pumped the bulb a couple times, gave a big pull on the rope. The thing roared to life. And the old guy said, what's that noise? Okay, so please don't block me. Technology education is important. So now I do want to shift gears a little bit and get to the topic. We've had 2 difficult years with COVID, and now the world is struggling with an unprovoked war on a peaceful neighbor. And so I just want to say, I am a strong believer that people have a right not to hear things that unnecessarily upset them, and I fully support that right. So if at any time, because there's some heavy topics in this talk, if you prefer to leave, I support your right to do that. On the positive side, it's not all bad news. I'm not running up to your doorstep and dumping a bunch of bad news and running away. That's not at all this. There's a great deal of hope and prospect in what I will say tonight, but some of it's a little tough to hear. Solutions will be proposed, and of course I must be honest and say some of them will be very difficult to implement, but they will work if they are properly implemented. When I was thinking about getting a PhD, I then had an undergraduate degree in business. I had been in the private sector for over 10 years. I was enrolled in a master's program in management, and I had a lifelong, still have a lifelong fascination with the future, with the possibility of it, and what will it bring? Well, if you're a business person in the business degree and in another business program and around business people all the time, the future sounds like strategy. And so that's what I got my doctorate in, and it was a good choice. I have enjoyed so much teaching strategy at the undergrad and graduate level, and enjoyed a lot of being involved in some strategic planning projects. When I started this thing a little while back, it was going to be a letter from OK Boomer to Gen Z. It was going to be a letter. And the letter was going to contain a confession. And I can summarize what that was about. When I was a college student, right modal year of the baby boom, when I was a college student, we knew that we, as a generation, were going to fix things that were wrong. in society. We knew it. And the confession, I can summarize in just 2 words. We didn't fix it. We didn't fix it. That was going to be the confession. So, I see now, we have some of our students here this evening. I see in this group of college students now more ambition to fix those large problems than I have seen in the intervening 50 years. But what I realized as I worked on it is the approach, this letter and sort of, hey, let's back the truck up and dump stuff on Gen Z, that wasn't going to work. And so I had to change the design of it because, as you will hear, one of the fundamental characteristics of what we're doing is it's going to take an enormous effort by a huge majority of the people. And that's what a lot of what I will say tonight. And when I say a lot of people, I include people who will soon be retired, like me. It's going to need everybody. So in strategy, and we have some former business students here tonight. One of the big things is called SWOT analysis. And SWOT analysis is not like you do to a fly. It's SWOT. And that's kind of what I'll talk about. Now, being honest, the whole thing about a SWOT analysis of the human race, that's clickbait. Sorry. That was clickbait, and I also wanted to jerk Dr. Kemper's chain, and that worked. And so, that's fine. But you can take the techniques of SWOT analysis, this kind of deep analysis and a structured, ordered way of thinking, and you can apply it to a small set of serious problems and maybe get some answers out of it. And that's partly what we'll do. But as long as we're going to talk about SWOT, let's talk about a couple of them that are kind of nice. The number of strengths of us as a species is too many to count. So, for example, we already have poetry, we already have Wi-Fi, we already have democracy. Those are pretty good. And then there's thousands of other strengths of humans. It's wonderful. So we're not lacking in the creativity. We're not lacking in the will to do good, powerful, positive things. On the opportunity side, there's a bunch of those out there too. I think we're going to have flying cars in a couple of years. Then, of course, the big one, lives of leisure. That would be an opportunity we'd like to capitalize on. And then for me, the favorite one would be never look old. Maybe too late for that one. But then when we look at the W and the T, that's really where I want to drill down into these topics. In terms of the threats, the T, 3 that I see that are potentially existential threats to the human race: disease, war, and climate change. And I'll tell you why those ended up being in the set. And then there are 2 weaknesses. So strengths and weaknesses are innate to the organization. So in this sort of half-baked thing for a species, innate to the species. And then opportunities and threats come more or less from outside the organization and outside the species. So weaknesses are about us as people. And the weaknesses that I'll address a little bit later on are racism and sexism. So that's how we're going to talk about it. And here's what I hope you're thinking right now. I hope you're thinking, this is not new. We know this. We know all of it. It's been written about tens of thousands of times. It's been on every form of media for decades. All of those things have been there. Why are you talking about it? Well, when you do SWOT analysis, there is a component that we don't talk about as much, and that's the element of time. You must think when you're assessing strengths, when you're assessing weaknesses, when you're thinking about opportunities and threats, you have to think, how long do we have? When must it be done? What will happen if we don't meet a deadline? All those things belong in SWOT analysis. And I don't know any other way to say it. The strategic situation regarding disease, war, and climate change has changed. And the time that we have believed, rightly or wrongly, that we had is no longer here. We must act much sooner and much more decisively. And that's the case I will try to make this evening. The time for kicking the cans down the road, which everybody, including me and my generation, have done, that's over. So what I'll do, I have little capsules that sort of describe very briefly the three big threats, because why go into a whole lot of detail? We kind of all know them. But I'll start off with a question. You don't have to call it out, for heaven's sakes, but I hope you will think just in your head, what's the answer to this question? How many American people, how many people in the United States have died from COVID? Just think about that for another 2.5 seconds. The correct answer is 1 million people have died. So that's what ramps up the time element on disease, because we cannot sit here and wait for something like that to happen again. And, you know, obviously I'm not an epidemiologist or a biologist or all those things, but it's so complicated when we think we can predict these kinds of things. I just think that's folly. I don't think we can. And we can't do anything except prepare ourselves to be better off than we were the last time. Of that 1 million people, I truly believe a large proportion of them did not need to die. They could have been sick, and maybe terribly so, but not died. And I really believe that inconsistent and inaccurate and inadequate management of the problem by government here and lots of places greatly added to the number of people who died. And we've got to prepare ourselves to not let that happen again. And so that's the little anecdote-sized thing of disease. We can conclude on that by saying politics were allowed to infect scientific knowledge and reasoning, and that led to bad results. Okay? War. Actually, war isn't really the perfectly named topic. The topic is nuclear weapons. And the reason is that the United States and a lot of other countries, I'm not saying it's not, this is not one of those beat up the U.S. things. The United States and a lot of other countries have pursued in their warlike planning a strategy. And that strategy is win at any cost. That's what we have pursued for all the years since World War II. And that led to the development of nuclear weapons. Their growth exploded in the 1960s, and by the end of the 60s, there were so many, it's just kind of mind-boggling. So there's kind of some little pieces of potentially good news. The numbers are less now, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So the nuclear weapons were out there. Then in the 1980s, in the mid-1980s, there was a consortium of scientists who studied the potential impact of an actual war using nuclear weapons. Weapons of unimaginable power, not to mention radioactivity, but unimaginable power. And they concluded that if we had an actual shooting war with nuclear weapons, that so much dust would be injected into the air from the explosions, and then they would cause massive fires, and there would be so much smoke that went into the atmosphere that it would dim the sunlight. They called it dusk at noon. That's what they call that. And of course, you know where this goes, right? This is an agricultural part of the country. We know if the sunlight changes, the plants don't grow the same. And if the plants don't grow the same, we don't eat. That's basically what goes on. A lot of stuff around here that's grown is fed to animals, but then we eat the animals. I mean, it would just be a massive potential starvation thing of unimaginable scale. So that was known. They made that very clear. You've heard the term nuclear winter. They talked about that. It was all those things. So, like I said, the numbers since then have shrunk wonderfully. They're probably 20%, maybe 25% of the numbers that were in existence at the end of the 1960s. Just a teeny problem. 14,000 nuclear weapons remain in 9 countries. Experts say it would take 900 weapons to end human life on Earth. Now, I personally don't think that that would end the cockroaches, and I don't think it would end those nice little fat squirrels we have here in Madison. Those things can live through anything. But for us, not so good. So we have 15 plus times as many weapons existing after massive reductions as would be needed to not have us be here anymore. So that's the thing. Now, I'll say this very quickly. This is pure personal opinion, but if you go back and you sort of see the economic, political, social things that were going on in the mid-1990s, when Bill Clinton was president of the United States and Boris Yeltsin was president of Russia, I think there was a window in which the number of nuclear weapons on Earth could have been radically reduced. But they weren't. And it could be because politics were allowed to infect scientific knowledge and reasoning, and that led to bad results. My Captain Obvious moment, given the headlines that are with us these days, the time to get this fixed was yesterday. Okay, this needs to be fixed. We got to get this fixed. It is a continuous existential threat. So, and I'm going to get killed for what happens next, but that's okay. I'll come back to life. When Hillary Clinton was running for president in 2008, Bill Clinton came to Madison to campaign for her. So Celia Keene, who so many of you know, is married to me and also an incredibly better understander of the rhythm of history than I am, decided she needed to meet a U.S. president. So off she went to meet Clinton. I wouldn't go because I was still pissed about the nuclear weapon thing. And she did. She met Bill, and they talked. And of course, that ends up in a photograph. So they took the photograph, and there was a woman there at that event who performed the most perfectly executed photobomb in the history of photography. She just got right in the middle of the picture. And so then I've said for many years to Syria, I can take the woman out of the picture. Nope, she didn't want that. So for 14 years, we have had a photo in our house of a woman who we don't know who she is. There she is right there. Okay? I'm preserving her privacy in case she's like your cousin or something. And so then, I had to tell that lame-o story about the woodcutter guy. Another thing I think must be in a last lecture is a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre. Because why not? There ought to just do it. It's a feng shui thing. And so in the existentialist play No Exit, Sartre wrote what is probably his most famous quoted remark. Hell is other people. That's what Sartre said. And I think he was talking about her when he said that. I really think that. Okay. So why hasn't NATO dusted the Russians off of Ukraine like a woodworker dusts sawdust off a board? Why not? Because the sociopath who's now in charge of Russia has nuclear weapons. In fact, Russia has the most nuclear weapons of any country in the world, but as you can easily imagine, the United States is a fairly trivial amount behind that. 9 countries have those weapons. And I guess my question is, are you feeling that time pressure yet? Last threat, climate change. I like thriller movies. In thriller movies, it seems inevitable that there's a good person who's chasing a bad person over the rooftops of buildings in a city, right? They just do this all the time, multi-story buildings, and they get to a point where they must jump from one building to the next building. And we all know where the thriller part comes in. If they make it, the movie keeps going, and if they don't, they die. That's the thing. That's the thriller part of the movie. So now this is going to be hard to hear. I mean, this is really hard to hear if you've never heard this before. All the efforts by all the countries, the accords, like the Paris Accords, the Kyoto Protocol, country budgets, joint agreements on spending, all those things that have been done about climate change are the leap from the first building that doesn't make it to the roof of the second. Everything that we have done is that. It's good. I'm glad we've done it. I would be sorry if we hadn't done it. It doesn't fix the problem. So here's some things to add, some facts to that. 650 million people in the world live in coastal areas that have elevations less than 30 feet. Not surprising, right? We have ports and all that kind of stuff. So here are 4 world famous cities. And just not to bury the lead, I know these little keys down here are too small to read, but what each one of them says is that all 4 of those cities are less than 30 feet above sea level. As the seas start to rise, I think one of our things that we do, maybe just so it doesn't make our head hurt, I don't know. As the seas start to rise, it's not a case of us sitting on the beach with a snorkel saying, well, the water's deeper than it used to be. No, it gets deeper where there are people. And we have reason now to believe that the projections of how quickly it will get deeper have been inadequate. They've underestimated the rate at which it will get deeper. For 40 years, that seems like a long time. 40 years now, we have had almost continuous increase in open water in the Arctic in the summer. It's becoming a strategic issue, right? When I look at that area up there, I think that's an area now where navies have to patrol because we didn't used to really have a thing. They used to make movies like the submarines were all under the ice. I don't know that really worked. They don't have to be under the ice anymore. It can be a boat on top of the water because those are oceans now in a big part of the year. We're also having, and it's too soon to sort of declare doom and gloom, but geez, there's some scary things happening in Antarctica with the weather as well. So if the water starts to rise, the people, 650 million people, are gonna have to move. There is no political or economic mechanism that will allow that to be done in a non-chaotic way. So the rise of the seas is not like, well, it got wet down near Miami. No, it's like people could end up creating the single worst oxymoron ever uttered. Global civil war. Just everybody fighting everywhere because the people that are getting away from the water have to go somewhere and somebody else already has that. So that's the trouble. So then you think, well, okay, what can we do? Well, what you have to do if you really want to understand this and think about it the right way is you have to reflect back to science, right? You have to read a lot of peer-reviewed science articles in reputable publications. And if you do that, you can understand it. I've done that. Here's the question that I have. Seriously. Why does this woman understand climate change, and politicians don't. What she says is highly compatible with what scientists say. And then the politicians say no, and that's overreaction, and that's knee-jerk, and that's publicity seeking, and whatever other mean things. And, you know, Greta Thunberg, which is, I admit, a very American English pronunciation of a Swedish name. The real name doesn't sound like that, but we all know her. She turned 19 in January. How can she know? I have a theory how she can do that. Politics has been allowed to infect scientific knowledge and reasoning, and it's leading to bad results. So that's the end of those little capsules of super duper bad news. Different sort of orientation, different topic, talking about those two weaknesses. And I really want to be careful what I'm saying here, because I think it's easy to say this in a clumsy way. When I talk about racism and sexism, my interest in it has always been about strategy. I do not intend to ignore or downplay the incredible amount of suffering, injustice, and socioeconomic harm that has been caused by those things. But that's not where I'm coming to this from. I'm coming to it from the standpoint of the argument can be built that racism and sexism as an existing phenomenon in a society weakens the society. It takes talent out of the equation. It spends resources to cause enmity and strife within the population. We're facing these threats that are coming on us now, and I don't believe that we are very well positioned to deal with them in the manner that they need to be dealt with unless we can relieve ourselves of some of our weaknesses. So it's an all hands on deck situation, and that's what we're really about. So now to the part where we ask the question, how in the heck are we going to fix this? It can be fixed. And the way it can be fixed is with activism. We need to fix it with activism. Now, we have activists that we all know and admire. So here they are, Gandhi, King, Anthony, Huerta, Means, Lewis, Milk, and Yousafzai. In no way do I mean to imply that we don't need people like that. Somebody who will throw in their entire existence, their entire self, their belief, their whole set of opportunities in life to a cause. We still need them. But I think that people who are engaged in this is what I call brave person activism. Single, small groups, individuals who just get out there and fight. But I think they would tell you one of the characteristics of that kind of activism is loneliness, because by definition, those movements are relatively small. And because they are small, and because the types of pressure that kind of activism can bring to bear are not a good match for the three big threats, the disease, nuclear weapons, and climate change. We need a different kind of activism, and I call that everyday activism. And it's available to all of us. Now, the good news is, and I don't mean this to be flip, because unfortunate situation with some of the folks in this slide, you're really not at risk of being shot if you do everyday activism. You're not at risk of being put in jail. That happened. What you can do, though, is integrate activism using mechanisms that are already in society and we're already completely inculcated into them to be activists in your daily life. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm arguing here, is that we can use everyday activism in our own lives to put pressure on the people who can fix those big problems. And we need to set that as the norm for life in a free society. If we were to do that, if we were to be able to apply the kinds of pressure that I'm talking about here, could lead to some interesting outcomes. So I'll just pick one that I think is it's a good example. It's a little bit off, and there's people in this room that know way more about it than I do. The UN Security Council, formed in 1945, now 77 years old. I think a lot of us, no matter what our personal political views are about anything, would say, that hasn't worked as well as we hoped. And the reason is that they allowed, at the formation of it, for authoritarian and totalitarian governments to be represented on the UN Security Council. That was a mistake, like a giant mistake, because membership on the Security Council gives you veto power over the Security Council's action. So if there's some bad government, I don't know, Russia. Anyway, if there's some bad government out there that wants to block the action of the Security Council, they can do it. That's just nuts. We have to start prioritizing democracy as a characteristic of relationships. And trust me, I've talked to lots of people who say, oh my goodness, I didn't know anyone could be as naive as you. I understand that. But my retort back to them is, you're right, I'm naive. What's your answer? What are we going to do differently? It's not working. And so if we could, as voters in countries that are in the United Nations, if we say to politicians, this matters to me, we need to fix this, we could do it. That's just one example. The UN has shown that it can't fix itself. Okay? It just doesn't have that. So then what do? Well, first one's easy. We vote in every single election, no matter how uninteresting it seems to us, no matter how unexciting we find candidates or issues in that election. And of course, we have to vote as highly informed voters in every election, every single one. The next one's a little harder. You hear this a lot. We have to reject doing business with companies that are part of the problem and not part of the solution. There's a lot of that. So if they are not helping to reduce climate change problems, if they have a relationship to anything to do with the pandemics and they're not managing it correctly, or if they have, it's probably going to be a lot smaller group of companies, but if they have issues to do with nuclear weapons, we should refuse to do business with them. That will not be easy. I think we all know it, right? We all could rattle off the 4 or 5 names of companies that make our lives easier because you just click things and stuff shows up on your doorstep. But we've got to be willing to do that. It's not this kind of bravery. But because there are so many of us, it could make a difference. Then the last one is hardest. There are many, many non-business organizations, political, social, religious, cultural. We have to do our darndest to get into those organizations and try to change them from the inside. That's hard. Here's the harder part. If we make our best effort to change them and we can't, we must leave them. That's really hard. Really, really hard. And so those are the things that we have to do that makes this possible. If we could, as a large society, start using, we have 2 mechanisms that are literally built into our heads in this country from when we're kids: representative democracy and market mechanisms. If we use those, vote with your wallet, vote with your feet, make organizations and politicians feel it if they're not doing the things that deal with those 3 existential threats. Look back just for a minute, getting to the end here, to Russia's recent crimes in Ukraine. And I have to tell you that makes people like me think, is there going to be a second Cold War? There's only been one so far. I was a kid for a lot of it. And they really did tell us, if there's a nuclear attack, get under your desk at school. They told us that. And so then I got to thinking, is that the most useless thing ever? In all of the world, is that the most useless thing? And I determined it's not, it's second. The most useless thing is the close button on an elevator. I'm just telling you, on this campus, in the rest of the world, they are not connected to anything. It is a purely psychological device that just, I don't know, we punch it a bunch of times and think it does something. I don't know. So that's what I'm saying. So back to Russia just for a minute. Everyday activism is working in the Russian attack on Ukraine. People, organizations, companies, and countries have kind of coalesced around the idea of we are going to make them pay a price they cannot afford. And everything I've been taught in my life and all the expert sources I read say that's actually happening. Now, it isn't all that visible yet. There are still major events. I mean, in this room, we have finance experts and historical experts. I'm just telling you, what we are doing as a world to Russia is going to crush them. Just watch. So that gives me hope, right? That makes me think, hey, if there are some things which people will act collectively to just object to the wrongness of it. And what I want to happen is for us to object as a society to the wrongness of the dangers from pandemics, from nuclear weapons, and absolutely from climate change. So then the last thing, sort of content-wise, that I'll say is that it's also possible to deal in societies, organizations, you name it, racism and sexism through everyday activism. And when you say that, and by the way, I add into that concerns about anti-LGBTQ attitudes as well. All this kind of unfairness to the other or the different or however you want to put it. When you say this, you get this question a lot. But what can I do? Now, a lot of the people that ask that question are asking it sincerely. Some are not, but a lot are. And what I would say is, we already know what to do. You don't have to invent anything. You don't have to think up anything. You don't have to dream it up for your own self. It's absolutely right out there in black and white. And I will be delighted to send you a list of sources that explain techniques that men can use to cut the amount of sexism against women in organizations. There are well-written, pragmatic, realistic things that can be done to limit racism, both event racism and systemic racism in a society. And in terms of being allies, because I really believe, quite seriously, that white people and men have to become allies to all the people that don't have the same level of privilege. People of color, women, all that, LGBTQ, all that. We must become real allies. That's not tolerance, that's not acceptance, that's not recognition. I'm talking about really acting on it. So you get this question, well, what can I do? And embedded in that question, people are saying, look, I'm just telling you now, I didn't cause that problem, okay? I'm not a racist, I didn't cause it. So stop telling me, that I need to fix it, okay? This is great. The power that comes with this last lecture thing is awesome. It's all Dr. Kemper's doing. I have the ability to absolve things. So I hereby say that everybody who's been alleged to be racist or sexist, correctly or incorrectly, I forgive you on behalf of the world. It's all done. Here's the thing. The problem is still here, right? So if we say that we can deal with who's at fault and who's to blame, the problem is still here. These problems are very severe problems in our society. We need to start thinking of ways to do things that'll make them less. And I believe that work with these known methods can do it. But it takes us actually doing it. It's different than not doing business with a company or voting against a politician. This is something we have to do proactively. We really have to do it proactively. And I frankly don't think of it as anything heroic. I think of it as decency. The other thing you can do is you can think of what we're doing with solving the weaknesses as conditioning our species to deal with existential threats. That seems noble. And then if you want to kind of go the graphic novel route, you can do that. Think of yourself as engaged in a titanic battle to save the world. And you know why you should think that? Because you are engaged in a titanic battle to save the world. That's why you should think it. So I have a device. It's right here. This device, elegant in its simplicity. This device uses the same technology as the James Webb Space Telescope. I'll have you know, one of the most sophisticated devices ever built by humans. And the good news is, under those gold covers on these front desks, is everybody gets one. So there's like 120 of them. If you don't get one, write your email down and I'll get you one. I can get more in days. What you do is, you aim this thing at your face. And then there's a little plastic tab on the bottom and you lift the cover of it. And in there, you will see an image of the person who needs to have everyday activism in order for this to work. That's what that is. It's amazing. It's 100% accurate and quite lovely as well. So don't forget to use your personal accountability detector, which I call PAD, personal accountability detector, to show you who needs to do the right thing for the human race. As I close, I just make a couple more comments of a lifetime of trying stuff, trying things. Frustration is temporary. Annoyance is temporary. Failure and heartbreak are temporary. But success and accomplishment tend to accumulate. So if we are able to act in this way, act collectively, to do these things, we will start to have successes. And when you do, get out your PAD and hold it up, and it will show you who has helped to fight off the main threats of the human race. It is really a cool device. I say we can do it, and I also say we must do it. Thank you for this great honor and great opportunity. I will remember it and you always. Thank you. Okay, that's enough. Thank you. Don't forget to get your PAD.